going to start with talking about the technical elements of collecting data. And so we're really lucky to have Olga Aymerich with us, who is the research officer and has been working on the project for almost 2 years now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she's going to talk about some of the kind of how you mount a study like this in the country where the study is being done. And then we'll, in 5 or so, 10 minutes, we'll switch to talking to the field researchers and what they did. And we have 3 of them, even though it's their weekend party night out. They've agreed to talk to us. So Olga, please go ahead and start now.
So exactly, we saw this morning how the methodology was based, the sample, and also the results. So today, now I will cover a bit the in between. So what happened since we receive tools from Georgetown till we give them back not very clean sometimes data set that they need to use for analyzing the data. So the data collection in Iraq takes place thanks to a team of almost 21 field researchers, data collectors, that they are distributed in 4 different governorates. And it's also thanks to their job and thanks to them that this study is also possible. So a little bit on the main challenges of this study when it comes to the operational part. This study, the teams, they are in the 4 governorates in which we originally started the study in the 4 governorates of displacement. So Kirkuk, Suleimania, Baghdad, and Basra. With the round after round, number of returnees increase. So also we have our
Not so sorry, Wissam.
Wissam is our team leader in Basra.
Sorry.
No problem. So a little bit our main challenge, especially starting from round 4, when the number of returnees increase, it's to try to track these people in these 7 governorates of previously origin. So we have returnees a bit spread across the country and in a very different areas, of course. For example, in Anbar, we have most of returnees there in Fallujah and Ramadi, which are mostly accessible. But also we have some returnees in Rutba, we have some few returnees in Kem, which implies maybe driving 8 hours, with also access permits, assessment of the security situation to reach there and to be able to do maybe 1 or 2 interviews, right? But that's why the field teams are so important, because it's them who go and do this part of the job. So yes, operations get a bit more and more complicated as we add rounds and rounds, mainly because of that. Also because some of the returnees, when they return, they go back to areas which are not necessarily safe. So also we need to be a bit more concerned about safety. And also because, of course, more locations of returns also implies more access letters to access each district. So,
well, Olga, it's not just returns, right? Because our movers, a lot of the movers moved out of the original.
Exactly.
So we had people who were intra.
You just turn that on.
We had
in the back.
we had in 2 governorates people who were intra-governorate displaced. So in total, with the returnees alone, you'd be talking about 9 governorates, but then that's 9 plus where all of these movers have gone, and that's almost all over the country. So I think we've got 16 or 17 out of 18 governorates now represented, and they do this Herculean job because the alternative is to do these interviews by phone. The survey is over 100 questions long. Doing it by phone is bad news on multiple levels. Both, methodologically you run into things where there's some questions people don't want to answer on the phone. There are some questions that they won't understand. There are trust issues that happen over time that just that require physical presence. So to avoid having to do it over the phone, they drive not only to 9 places, they drive to like 17 places to be able to do this, which is unbelievable.
Also, we had to adapt a bit the team because, of course, at the beginning, for example, there was no team in Nineveh. Most of the returns now they are back to Nineveh. So, of course, for example, we had to then create a new team starting last year that is a mini team, let's say, that it's based in Nineveh, managed by Kirkuk because it's originally the portfolio of respondents that they had, but now they can cover a bit more easily those returnees in Nineveh. So of course we had the teams based on the areas of displacement. Now they are a bit everywhere, but also to keep the same, as much as possible, interviewing the same, let's say, respondents with the same field researcher, because of course there is also a factor of trust. So
Yeah, do you want to ask?
yes, which is very important because, for example, and probably they can speak about this more than me, but we have some of the field researchers who interview one family in round 1, and now in round 4 they are asking us, how is this person who interviewed me in round 1? Where is she? Why is not doing the interview to me now? I said, no, this person maybe got upgraded to a new job, or my colleague is covering now for this person. But there's a very strong feeling of rapport, and they ask, and they are happy to see them, and I want them to speak about that, so I will introduce you to them. It's we have on Skype Wissam, who is the team leader in Basra since the very beginning of the study. We have Ariy in Kirkuk, he's also our team leader in Kirkuk, and we have Ariy, who is the acting team leader for MENA. And I think all of them, they are with us since the very beginning of the study.
We had, at the beginning, we had 2 female team leaders and 2 male team leaders, and then one got a better job after round 2. One of the females got a better job after round 2, so then we were 3 and 1, and then the 4th female team leader just got another better job as well. So we all move around.
There is no better
so
job.
the women,
I don't know what they're talking about.
But still, our field researchers, they are almost 50% male-female, which also contributes to, we always try to interview male-male, female-female. So, for example, Basra team, they are 4 people with some, and they are 50-50. So 50% men, 50% female. So we had some questions for...
Can you introduce the other ones?
There are only 3 on the line. We have a 4th one, Haider, who is not on the line, but is our team leader in Baghdad. And he couldn't join today, but...
So, team leaders, I gave you the list of questions that we wanted to ask you, and if you could each go in it's I think Wissam, Ariy, and Ali in some order there, and so the question is.
Start with the second one.
Oh, we're going to start with the second question. How did your relationships with the households change over time? And what became easier and what became harder? So that's the second question. Which one of you wants to start?
Wissam?
Wissam, you start.
Okay.
Please.
Okay, عارفة.
تفضل.
يعني بداية انه شكرا جزيلا انه انتم دعيتونا لهذا الايفنت. سعيدين هواي انه نشوف شغلنا يعني شو يعني يمكن يرى النور، وسعيدين هواي انه احنا على مدار 4 سنوات كنا وياكم. سؤالك عن علاقتنا ويا الريليشن شيب ويا الارقام او الهاوس هولد.
لحظة شوي خليني أترجم وسام. So he says.
Thank you very much for inviting us. It's been a pleasure over the last 4 years to be a part of this project.
Thinking about this second question, he's now going to answer that. اتفضل.
يعني اللي نتذكر بداية الجولة الأولى بشهر الثاني تقريبا أو شهر الرابع بدينا نجمع العينة العشوائية من الكرايتيريا بشهر الثاني، بشهر الرابع بدينا الجولة الأولى الدراسة 2016. يعني ما اسولفش على حجم التحديات اللي واجهناها بجمع العينه، لان مو بسهوله انه تفاوض الناس على انه تقنعهم حتى يشتركون بدراسه طوعا.
So part of the راح أترجم هلا. Part of the real issue he was saying is not just going and asking the questions of the families, but was really at the beginning in trying to sort of convince families to be part of this study, because it's not something that IOM does with them, but it's also just like, you know, you're opening up, you know, people's lives and wounds to this kind of outsider to talk about all of these questions. And so he said we spent a lot of time trying to convince people to be part of this study. أي صح وسام؟
صح. في ظروف تسود هاي العلاقه تقريبا علاقه مقطوعه اول ما بدينا وياهم، اي تعامل مسبق ما كان موجود، الثقه تقريبا ما لها اي خطوط حتى لو كانت خفيفه، يعني بدينا نمد وياهم بصور ثقه بسيطه الى ان قنعناهم انه يشتركون بالدراسه. كان هذا التحدي الاكبر بالنسبه لنا كفيلد ريسيرش.
So next one here.
You say, go ahead, you translate.
Oh no, so it was just the same.
Yeah.
So just the very idea of putting the sample together. No, سمعنا وسام. علي أو.
Yes.
Yeah. So what is yeah, go ahead. So what do you think? How did what was the main challenge you faced at the beginning, or how did your relationship change over time with the families that you were interviewing?
Yes. As good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As Wissam said at the beginning, we faced some challenges to convince people to participate in this study. And starting with we start to build a trust relation with these families because it was at the beginning, the first time we get to talk with them, so we convinced them to participate. After that, by 4 rounds of the study, both quantitative and qualitative parts of this study, we could build a trust relation between us and these people, our participants of this study. This developed that these participants calling us all the team's members and asking, how are you doing? Hi, it's Eid. Congratulations, it's Eid and this stuff. We don't asking for the credit or any benefits. We call and ask about your health and your situation. And they would like to us to visit them and invite us to their houses to have lunch and with Iraqi traditional foods with them. So we have a friendship and good relation with these participants over these years.
That's great. Thank you, Ali. Ariy, do you have something to add, please?
مرحبا جميعا.
يا هلا.
أهلا وسهلا. تكملة إلى كلام إخواني علي ووسام بالنسبة إلى العلاقات مع العوائل التي جرت أن أصبح هناك علاقات عميقة جدا بين العوائل والباحثين.
So Ariy is saying that he's adding, emphasizing what his colleagues have said, that there are deep relationships that have developed over this 4 years between the field researchers and these families, which I think none of them anticipated. You didn't think this was going to happen, right? And I don't think any of us anticipated either. But it really, I think it is a really important part of a longitudinal study, and I think we see it in the data in sort of rounds 2, rounds 3, and rounds 4, and maybe in round 5, how we really feel like there is such a level of trust between people that we're getting really accurate data.
So yeah, point. This is. Can I خليني أسألكم شباب. So I'm going to ask them to what extent they felt that, you know, IOM is known as an aid organization that sometimes when you go into this type of study might bias your responses. People might give you the answer they think you want to hear, or give you the answer that they think will get them aid. So my question is going to be to what extent the field researchers felt that the answers they were getting were the answers that they thought people, that the respondents thought the organization wanted to hear. So بالنسبة لكم بعمركم حسيتوا وانتوا عم تقوموا بالمقابلات انه العوائل كانوا عم يردوا بالشكل اللي انتوا متوقعينهم او نوعا ما انه ما كانوا عم يردوا بالشكل الصادق على الأسئلة لأنه بناء على اعتبار إنه حاسين ممكن جواب واحد بدال الآخر لسؤال يكون له فائدة يعني.
تفضل.
واضح السؤال، واضح السؤال. ست سلمى, I think no, they were answering honestly. And they talked relations. We have a good relation and friendship with them, so they were honest and answered the question not as we want, for their situation and their feelings and their life.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
إضافة على عفوا دكتور. إضافة لما بدأ علي سؤال ست سلمى. بصراحة يعني يوم وصلنا بعد 4 سنوات علاقة جدا وثيقة ويا الاي دي بي في محافظاتنا موجودين ما يعني من بدينا بالجولة الأولى الثانية الثالثة الرابعة كانوا هم يعني يطلبون إنه يحكون وكانوا يجبروننا إنه نطلع اللي بداخلهم لأنه خلص فاقد بيته محروق بدياله مثلا او اكو ناس تمنع انه يطب اليسرى في ديجريد يمنعوه انه خلص ما يدخل كان يريد بس يحكي ويانا لانه الحكومه يقول ما تسمعني اي مسؤول ما زارني الوحيدين انتم منظمه الهجره تجون على مدار هذه السنين تواكبونا وتتابعونا يكفينا السؤال مو الا البلد يكفينا السؤال انه انتم تتابعونا على مدار اشهر كامله سنين 4 انتم تتابعونا يعني هذا كله بسبب انه احنا نتابعهم اضافه الى انه قلت لك علاقه بدات يعني تقوى يوم عن يوم صار لنا جديات صار هذا الحدث وياي قبل اسبوعين اتصل بي شخص من الموصل قال لي انه اكو بيت انا مجهزه بس لكم انتم الناس الاشخاص الاربعه اللي يشتغلون على هذا الموضوع انه ساعدناهم جديات ونفتخر انه ساعدناهم على المستوى الشخصي الرصيد ترى يعني $10 ما كانت لها قيمه جديات لهم لكن وايد ناس تبكي من نحكي وياها شوف نبكي على بيته يبكي على بيته المحروق يبكي انه ما يخلونا يرجع مثلا وايد حوادث.
So شكرا وسام. So can you do the last part of it, the Mosul part, and I'll do the first part?
Sure. So he ended with an example about 2 weeks ago. He started, the first portion of it was saying that part of the reason that the relationship is so strong is this consistent interface and interaction between the enumerators, the field researchers and the families are saying, you know, you're the only people over these last 4 years who have kept in touch with us. You're the constants rather than government officials or NGO officials. You're the people that we see most and who haven't forgotten about us. And that has to do with, so I gave an example of 2 weeks ago, a family from Mosul called them up and said, you know, we've prepared a room for the 4 people of, for the 4 field researchers who come and we can't wait for you to come and visit us and talk with us some more about this. And that type of relationship has also helped in making sure that people feel like it's in their interest to be honest on questions, right? Is that they need to honestly say what they're feeling because this is a vehicle for their voices to be heard.
Can I ask him a question?
Can we go through a little bit further and then we'll do questions just because it's technologically a little complicated. شباب ممكن ننقل السؤال الأول إنه هو الأصعب سؤال اللي أنتوا سألتوه. So what was the hardest question that you had to ask? And how did you handle it?
Yeah. Wissam, تفضل.
تفضل. Please, after you.
Wissam is the firewall.
بصراحه السؤال يعني هواي اسئله كانت يعني صعب علينا نطرحها وبنفس الوقت يعني كنا محرجين لانه واجهنا بالجوله الاولى او بالجوله الثانيه خلينا نقول يعني واجهنا في الصعوبه بطرحها ما قدرنا نعيد نسالها بس يعني كنا مجبرين لانه لازم نسال السؤال يعني نصا.
So he's saying that, like, first and even in the second rounds, that there were certain questions that the respondents had difficulty understanding, and they had to kind of repeat or explain, which is partially also a learning curve for us in terms of how people understand questions. تفضل أستاذ وسام.
السؤال مثلا على سبيل المثال انه منسينا عن المقارنه بين الوضع الصحي قبل النزوح وبعد النزوح.
الوضع شو sorry?
Second. So one of the questions was your living and housing situation before displacement and after displacement. اتفضل.
يعني مثل هذا السؤال كان نواجه رأسا بصراحه ينفجرون يعني بالبكاء خاصه النساء رأسا يبكون.
So one of the difficulties in that question was, particularly when we were interviewing women, as soon as we sort of asked that question, they would burst into tears and start crying because of the situation in which they were living.
لأنه شخص من قاعد ببيته ومرتاح ويعني وفجأة يمضون حوالي 3 أيام بحيث المسلحين ببيته ويتهجر إلى محافظة أخرى هو مو من نفس تقاليده وعاداته يختلف الوضع تجبر إنه هو ينتقل لمحافظة أخرى في جراج على سبيل المثال أو في مخيم.
So he was saying, you're living in your house and you're comfortable and you have all your things around you and you're have relatives and friends and you're living and all of a sudden armed men break into your house and kick you out and you take nothing with you and then you end up in another place where they do things differently. They have different customs and traditions and you don't know anybody and just how difficult that is. And so just asking this simple question about your housing situation before and your housing situation now just raised this sort of emotional issue that I think they hadn't anticipated.
السؤال الآخر وأترك المجال لزملائي سؤال التعويضات خاصة التعويضات النازحين.
So the other question is the compensation questions. تفضل.
هذا كان يصير حفيظة الناس المشاركين وياه بالدراسة أغلبهم يعني كانوا يشوفون إنه السؤال غير واقعي لسبب انه دولة يعني الحكومة العراقية غير جادة بملف التعويضات، اكو لجنة تعويضات، اكو اجراءات روتينية بيروقراطية ما لها حد ووقت كلش طويل وبالتالي يعني التعويضات ما جاي يعني توصل للناس بصورة صحيحة، اصلا الناس اللي يسموا تعويضات هم نقطة في بحر مقابل العدد هائل من الحاسين ما كان يوصل هذا الشيء يعني يقول لك هذه هواء بشبك ما في تعويضات.
So in terms of the compensation question, I think one of the things that it's a very straightforward set of questions, but the people didn't see them as straightforward and really kind of responded in multiple ways about why this is not going to happen and also if we do get any compensation it's just a sort of small drop in the large sea of what we have lost and so it became a much sort of deeper philosophical and almost political question than were kind of laid out in the survey. Did I catch all that? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so it's like the first one, anything that's eliciting really emotive responses, which on the one hand is good because you want to know what gets people to tick, but on the other hand, when you're trying to do this kind of survey, it's hard to, you got to proceed, and you also don't want those emotions to impact the way they're answering other questions, but yeah, I guess from their end, it's really when you hit a button, I think maybe in qualitative this is better. You can leverage this to your advantage. But so can we actually ask that if they're qualitative, like if they saw?
يا شباب بالأسئلة النوعية هل لقيتوا نفس الصعوبات أو صعوبات أخرى أو شغلات يعني مختلفة؟
Dr. Rochelle, for the quantitative a qualitative questionnaire, only one note, which in the round 4 it was related to the questionnaire for the host community questionnaire. There were questions related to think local government, how can improve the situation of IDPs. Then what do you think the national government, KRG, could improve the situation of IDPs? And what do you think the international organizations such as UN, Western and Middle, other actors can improve the situation of IDPs? The thing is these people not have the clear idea about these possibilities of local government, central government, KRG government, and international organizations. So they were answering like a general answer that include all of them, because as you know, the education level of these participants is different, and according to their knowledge, they were answering these questions. So difficult to answer it clearly, or for some people.
Yeah, great.
Not all of them.
Thank you, Ali.
It's from my side.
Yeah.
بالنسبة للأسئلة الحافلات النوعية يتكلم عن نوع المساعدات التي تحصل عليها الحكومة والمنظمات الغير الحكومية. أو السؤال هم تستلزم من المساعدات أو عن ذكر أسماء المنظمات، يعني كنا نعاني صعوبة في جواب هذا السؤال. أغلبيتهم كان جوابهم بلا، لأن كانوا يعتقدون بأن راح يحصلون على مساعدات مالية من عندنا إذا قالوا لا، أو إذا جابوا بنعم ممكن أن لا يحصلوا على أي شيء من المساعدات. هذا كنا نلاقي صعوبة قليلة بهذا السؤال.
So this is the type of response by it. So
Use the microphone.
what he's suggesting is this is the question on specifically on aid, and I think I understood that there are two parts of it. First of all is like, you know, aid organization is a big idea. People might not necessarily like, they want specifics more than anything else, not just like general aid organization. But the other part of it is a fear that if you say that they are getting it, that it's going to stop. Which you know, that's how. So for methodologists, this is what kind of we call social desirability bias. And what's interesting about this study, both for policy, most importantly I think for policy, but also for academia, is when you, what is socially desirable or what is good or what you have to say varies from context to context. And learning about what that is in different places is a very, very difficult process. United States questions that has to do with race. That's not necessarily politically charged in the Middle East. But so this is one of the questions here. So on aid, it's like, oh my God, if I tell them I'm getting aid, they're going to stop it. So what you're seeing is people's fears come out. So this is why also this type of debrief with the people who are actually doing the questions is really, really important, because this is where you know, okay, I have a measurement issue on my survey, but I also have tapped into an issue that I have to try to design a question around.
We did get a lot of questions. We did get a lot of answers on did you get aid. I mean, I think it's actually, in some ways, thinking about it, it's surprising how much people say they did get aid. I mean, we have to try and figure these things out. What I always found interesting is that people don't remember the names of the organizations that give aid, because oftentimes it's done in a certain way, or so it's, I got it from, an international organization, or I got it from, and sometimes they remember exactly. So you're also dealing not only with kind of the aid process that we can't see into because we don't know who's doing what where, but also then people's memory. So you got people that remember things exactly, and you got people that just remember, a heater, we got a heater at some point. So it's the qualitative raise a lot of these kinds of issues, which are interesting.
عفوا دكتور.
اتفضل.
وننظر بعد على من ضمن الاسئله يعني الكواليتيف انترفيو. من الاسئله الصعبه صراحه. السؤال اللي يسال عن انه الشخص المشارك ما هي احلامك وامالك بخصوص اطفالك، هيك شيء اتذكر بالجوله الرابعه. يعني هذا كان بصراحه من الاسئله اللي هو اكيد بالنسبه لي فاجئني الصراحه وفاجئ التيم، بالاضافه الى انه كان جدا صعب انه نطرحها، لانه جربنا انه نطرحها كتيست ويا بعض المشاركين يكون جوابه يعني التالي انه اللي مثلا استاذ وسام عن اي احلام تحكي انت؟ اولادي صار سنتين هم مو بالمدارس، ما راحوا للمدارس لانه وثيقه دراسه مثلا ما موجوده، او انا يرادي فلوس حتى اروح لمحافظتي، او ما عندي فلوس حتى اخليهم يدرسون حاليا. فانا اي احلام انت جاي تحكي؟ ابني اذا اريد ان ادخله مثلا سنتين ترك وهسه يريد يكمل دراسه، او 3 سنوات ترك وهسه يريد يكمل دراسه، فرق عن زميله بالطول 30 سنتيم، 30 35 سنتيم بالطول، يعني ابنه اكبر من قرينه اللي هو لازم يدخل وياه بنفس الصف. فهم تركوا 3 سنين او 4 سنين من الدراسه، يقول لي عن اي احلام انت جاي تحكي؟ يعني كنا نواجه صعوبه صراحه في هذا السؤال، لانه هم احلامهم متبدله.
شكرا Wissam. So about 3 years ago, Dana Dirani, who was one of the people reading the questions, she was a student in one of my classes, and she did an interview. She's from Syria, and she did a project for the class interviewing people about their ideas about hope. And one of the questions she asked them was, what are your dreams for your children? And so in reviewing and going over all of these qualitative questions, she said, why don't we ask that question? She was a research assistant at the time. And so we've put that question in there. What are your dreams for your children? And Wissam says that was one of the hardest questions to ask, or hardest questions to sort of hear the answers to, because people, particularly for people whose children had been pulled from school, and she said, Wissam said it's a whole kind of, like they've had to change their dreams for their children because of displacement. And he talked about, interviewing people whose kids had been out of school for 2 years because they either didn't get the right paperwork to get them in school or they didn't have the funds. There's something about the size of the kid that I missed in there.
They was talking about the differences between the size of their kids who skipped the school and his grade, the current grade. Like
the kids
they
of the
are bigger than like within 30 centimeters. I don't know what inches, but
12.
it's a huge difference between both, so it's going to be complicated.
Yeah.
Story.
Yeah, so how to get back into school, but size, and so if a kid has been out for 2 years to go back to grade 2, and now they're a foot taller than the grade 2 other kids in grade 2, what does that do to the child who is so different? So he was talking about how just this simple question about dreams sort of brings up a lot of other issues. Do you want to do another question?
So we did the last one. That's just the last one.
Okay, يا شباب ممكن نروح للسؤال الرابع. What advice would you give to researchers designing similar studies؟ يعني النصيحة اللي انت تعطوه للناس اللي عم بخططوا للدراسة مثل الدراسة.
تفضل نيابة عن
تفضل علي، تفضل علي.
They left each other. Yeah, exactly.
Please.
Our advice or recommendations will be some 2-3 points. We discuss about it, and my colleagues can also maybe add something. The first one is the type of questions need to be logical, acceptable for the communities, and touch the situation of that community and that conditions. So through the tools, trainings, and workshops we conduct in the past before the 4 rounds, we used to develop and discuss all the tools and test it before going to the field. This was very useful because we were able to decide which question can work, which one cannot work, and to decode it and ask it in which way. And if there are any specified situation in Baghdad or Kirkuk or Suleimania, to take it in account. Because not all the conditions and the situations similar. Every government has its something different from other place. The first one, and the second thing is for the quantitative questionnaires or tools. No need to make a long list of questions. So sometimes people no, like it for us, if we used to do it, and okay, but if you make more questions, maybe you will not be more happy for that. And yes, you can isolate some questions in one question or do it in different ways.
Great, thank
Just
you.
like a qualitative questions. We are asking one question, but it contains different parts. Like
Yes, sorry about that.
okay, thank you.
Did you have a third thing, Ali?
No, that's it for my second.
Okay, did anybody else have comments on the advice?
نعم
اتفضل.
دكتور روشيل دكتور روشيل
ايه تفضل. أري تفضل.
دكتور اسماعيلي
هلا
الو
Type it in
Ariy,
your
you're
head.
This is gonna require me to know how to stop.
دكتور اسماعيلي
Yeah, go ahead, Ari. We can hear you.
دكتور الدراسات اللي احنا عملناها كانت دراسات في كانت في دراسات وتعمل من كل داير مع التدريب لأن الدراسات على
Sorry, Ari, you're cutting in and out.
عفوا دكتورة اسمعيني؟
أنا بسمعك يا وسام بس أري أنا مش عم بسمعك. تفضل.
عفوا دكتورة. بالنسبة للأدفايس للريسيرشرز إنه بصراحة يعني دراسة خلال الأربع سنوات اللي فاتت الأسئلة كانت واقعية تقريبا بنسبة 95% لأنه كانت يعني تعرض للتطابق وهي الفيلد ريسيرش يعني تأخذ مشورة بيئة العمل إنه هذا أسئلة مثلا تشتغل بمحافظة البصرة ممكن هي تصاغ بطريقة أخرى في محافظة كركوك بسبب تنوع الاجتماعي الموجود. أنا بالنسبة لي يعني من جانبي إنه الأسئلة اللي تصمم مثل هيج دراسة يعني صراغ أو موضوع بناء على الواقعية وعلى بيئة العمل، على بيئة العمل الموجود. مثلا الأسئلة الصعبة كان موضوع اعتمادا على المكان اللي راح تنسأل. ما ممكن اليوم يعني نسأل سؤال باستيمانية عن وجود مثلا ميليشيات. صعب. بس ممكن انه بالبصره من تجي تسال عن شيء موضوع اكيد راح يكون فعال اكثر. يعني نصيحتي انه تكون واقعيه اكثر وبناء على بيئه العمل.
So he says most of the questions, almost all of the questions fit 95% of the people in the situations. And they were sort of واقعية, like logical, like realistic.
Realistic, yeah.
So they could be answered without sort of additional concern. He said, but in sort of fashioning a study like this, one of the key things he thinks is that the questions have to be realistic and customized and fit where they're asking. He said, so when you do such a broad study and it's a longitudinal study, there are challenges about sort of questions like asking about militias. Like you could ask that in Basra without really a problem and people would comment on it. But in other parts like Suleymaniya or some of the other places, it may get very sensitive and people may feel uncomfortable answering some of these questions, and you may feel uncomfortable asking them. So he was just saying this one works in part because we don't really ask about militias or other really sensitive political topics. We tried really, really hard not to put people in that kind of position. If they talk about it, that's fine, but we didn't sort of ask directly about those sorts of things. So that was what he had to say. يا شباب بدنا نخلي الناس الموجودين يسألوا أسئلة لكم. معلش موافقين أنتم؟
نعم تفضل.
Okay, شكرا لكم. You need to use the mic. That's on.
So I'll ask in Arabic first and then I'll say it in English.
شلونكم يا شباب؟ شاكو ماكو؟ أنا أحكي لكم سؤالين. زين شلون تشوفون تغير التعاطي معاكم مع تغير الموقف السياسي للمرجعيات الشيعية تحديدا؟ قديش تأثرت إجابات الاستمارات بالرأي الديني أو بالإيحاءات الدينية؟ والسؤال الثاني على المستوى الشخصي صنفوكم عملاء للأمريكان أو لا؟
يا دكتور غسان شو هالأسئلة؟
Well, my first question was, how do you see the interaction with you at the level of the people with the changing in the political position? In the 4 years, many political changes were there. So how did this affect the answers of the surveys? Because usually we know that Iraq is, complicated related to, the influence of the religious figures in it, number one. And number two, what about your personal, on a personal level, were you just discriminated against as spies for the United States? So, these are my two questions.
جاوبوا الأسئلة مثل ما بدكم. تفضل.
بس السؤال مرجعية ما واضح يعني بصراحة ما سمعت أنا بالنسبة لي صح.
أنا كنت أسأل
دكتورة روشيل في صدى للصوت ما يخلينا نسمع السؤال واضح في صدى.
أوكي. أحسن. بحاول أحكيكم. So, دكتور.
أعتقد راح يصير لنا حرب طائفية على.
No, not really. أبداً. At least شباب.
تفضل. بس خففها شوي.
شباب نحن كلنا بنعرف أن الجو العام والرأي العام يتأثر بإرهاصات الحالة الدينية. طبعاً تغير الموقف السياسي بالأربع سنوات للدراسة. هل برأيكم أثر هذا على أجوبة الناس اللي كنتوا عم تسألوهم؟ يعني كانوا يجاوبوا بشكل يمكن صاروا مرتاحين أكثر بالإجابة، صاروا متعاونين أكثر؟ هذا أول سؤال. والسؤال الثاني كان على المستوى الشخصي، لأنه من يعمل في الأبحاث أحيانا يصنف will be biased against him، يعني بيقولوا عنك عملاء للأمريكان. نحن نعمل في المجتمع المدني في لبنان موصومين أن نحن من جماعة العملاء الأمريكان. هل تعرضتوا لهذا الموقف؟ بس هيك.
لا استاذ وسام اقدر اجاوب عن هذا لان انا مريت بهذا شو اسمه، ما اعرف عن قصر وكركوك وانما اتكلم بالنسبه الى سليمانيه. اكثريه الاي دي بيز هم من كان جوابهم من يريدون يفرض السيطره، هم كان اغلبيتهم يريدون عوده القوات الامريكيه الى مناطقهم.
So he's saying Actually, most of them wanted the return of American
بالنسبة إلى
soldiers.
سليمانية دكتورة رشا إلى الIDPs في سليمانية.
These are the IDPs in Suleimania. Most of them wanted the American forces to return because they were seen as providing safety and security in a situation of multiple forces and the lack of security. So from a security in Suleimania, but Suleimania is part of the Kurdistan region of Iraq, and the Americans were there since 1991, essentially, above what is called the 41st parallel, 44th, 40, whatever parallel it was. So the Americans had been there for a long time. It wasn't just since 2003.
دكتور رشيد كانوا يريدون عودة تلك القوات إلى مناطقهم الأصلية وليس إلى مناطقهم الأصلية، الحكم في مناطقهم الأصلية.
So they actually even wanted those forces to return, the American forces to return back to go back to their areas of return with them, not just stay in Suleimania, because they saw them as safety. Okay, shukran. Are there other questions? I think, Rose, you're going to have to come up here and ask it. Sorry, because there's لحظة شوي. في سؤال تاني معلش.
Okay.
Thank you for taking the time to speak to us. I would like to ask you if the project affected you personally, and if so, how?
فهمتوا السؤال؟ هي عم تسأل، هي تشكركم على شغلكم وعلى عملكم بهذا المشروع، وبتسألكم إذا هل هذا المشروع أثر عليكم شخصيا، وإذا جواب نعم كيف أثر عليكم؟
نعم دكتور أعطوني الفرصة دقيقة واحدة أجاوب على هذه الأسئلة.
إيه تفضل.
بالنسبة للدكتور وسام شكرا جزيلا. بالنسبة للتأثر الإجابات على صعيد التغيرات والتقلبات السياسية بالعراق، هذا ما أتأثر عن رأيي وعن تجربتي، ما أتأثر. احنا بعيدين عن السياسة بكل أشكالها، والشخص اللي نقابله سواء كان رأيه احنا نحترم رأيه، لكن بعيدين كل البعد عن السياسة والتدخل فيها. هذا فيما يخص الجزء الاول من سؤالك. الجزء الثاني اللي يتعلق بالوصفون عملاء، لا انا شخصيا ما واجهت هيك وصفت المعروفه اللي هي جزء من الامم المتحده من احد اي UN agencies، بعيده كل البعد عن عملاء او استخبارات، منظمه انسانيه تقوم بعمل انساني بحت.
خليني أترجم. خليني أترجم معلش. I wanted to respond to Dr. Hassan's question and really said that no, as IOM they work in a very neutral manner and they make sure to maintain neutrality and not sort of be part of any of the political issues, and they work also really hard to respect people's opinions and their responses, and so they whatever people say they just write down and move on with. And as IOM, they're part of the United Nations, and he said he has never personally been accused of being a spy or cooperating with anything. Okay, تفضل على الأسئلة الثانية.
بالنسبة للأستاذ اللي طرحت السؤال، أنا بصراحة عندي موقف شخصي واحتمال طريف صار وياي التأثير على حياتنا الشخصية، موضوع الدراسة والبحث. طبعا زملائي يعرفون عن خبرة العملية الجراحية خلال هالسنة، وبعد ما خرجت من العملية الجراحية الإنسان يكون تحت تأثير بنج، تحت تأثير المخدر، لأن البنج نعم مخدر، فالإنسان ما يكون كامل وعيه بهالأثناء. بعدها من رجعت لحالتي الطبيعية، سألت الموجودين أطراف في والدي أخويا مثلا، قلت له ايش حكيت أنا، شنو الكلمة اللي قلتها أنا؟ قالوا لي أنت سألت عن نازحين على IDPs.
So he had surgery and was under anesthesia, and when he woke up from anesthesia, he was still a little bit out of it. So his his father and his brother and his close family members who were next to him told him that once he woke up, the first thing he asked about, or one of the first things he asked about, was about IDPs. so like in his anesthesia-induced stupor, like this is what is on his mind.
I believe
سلامتك
عفوا دكتورة.
اتفضل.
يعني السؤال الثاني للاستاذ، شكرا جزيلا انه طرحت هيك سؤال. الصراحه بالجوله الرابعه يعني من الجوله الثالثه عفوا انا اشتريت تقريبا حقيبه صغيره جدا، يعني نوعيه جلد قوي. كل مستمسكات عائلتي هذه الجمله، كل ما املك من الدكتوراه هذه الجمله، ذهب زوجتي هذه الجمله، لانه يعني هو احلم انه انا نازح. صحيح؟ ولحد الان يعني هذا الوسواس القهري هو متواصل وياه. باي لحظه انه انا اتوقع انه اصير طفل.
أنا سويت نفس الشيء يا أستاذ وسام. He said while doing around 3 interviews, one of the things he did was he went out and bought a really heavy leather bag and put all of their family documents in it, all of his wife's gold that she doesn't wear, and all of the things that they might need, just like with the idea that if they ever have to be displaced, or they are ever displaced, they're ready to go because they hear the stories of all the things that have happened to people. Shukran, Ustaz. Okay.
Any other questions?
شكرا كثير 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 ويعطيكم الف عافيه، يعني احنا غلبناكم بزياده، بس شكرا وممنونين كثير، يعني احنا كثير استفدنا منكم، فشكرا لكم. فهلا بنخليكم ترجعوا لاهاليكم وللسهره
للسهره اكيد.
It's early.
ودعوتونا لهذا نزيل شكرا حضراتكم.
وبالمناسبة شفنا لورينزا، صار لنا مدة ما شايف فيها، اليوم شفناها لورينزا.
They're very happy to see Lorenza because she used to do the. She used to
I miss you.
So yeah.
Miss you too, Lorenza.
Okay, thank you very much and goodbye. Thank you. They also said thank you all for listening to them and for being part of this.
They are starting data collection for the next round 5, in 1 week. So
how does it work? Is it like is it a part-time job where they pay?
They are full-time with us.
Full-time here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but they dedicate 3 to 4 months
And for
exclusively
different
to
projects.
this project. Yes. So now in 1 week they will start. Now we are in the process of logistics. So it's convenient that the event it's today, because next week they will be all over the place, running like crazy, trying to interview families. So,
What can you tell us a little bit? I wasn't here for this. What does the operational plan look like? So we
Yes.
give you this pretty table.
Yeah, I know.
And then say go. So from the pretty table to the Excel sheet, like how does it work?
First, we do a round of calls to make sure that the IDPs and movers are still where they were like 1 month ago. The returnees, we kind of assume that we will find them there.
Okay.
Then because also the rounds of the credit we buy from different companies depending on, so we need to make sure that it's the company that the IDPs are currently using.
So if you haven't followed this, we do. It's about $8, $10
Yes,
a month,
approximately $10 per
in
month.
phone credit, and it gets transferred to the family's phone, and so that's a whole other logistical complication.
And cost, and that's why also
And
the
cost,
study
yes,
is
of
expensive, because every year about $300,000, $400,000 go to the families in credit somehow. So,
Which is amazing.
incredible.
I mean, I think
that would be
which is assistance.
Yeah, and it's. I think to me this phone credit is a way to kind of respect them for what they are and who they are, and it's not sort of aid in like we're giving you money. It's much more sort of exchange, but it's also something that they can do something with. They can transfer phone credit to their daughter or to their mother or something. I mean, it's a way to. Yeah, but it's an interesting, and I'm convinced it's part of why we have kept such a high rate of people in the study, along with the sort of keeping the same enumerators in the study who have really developed, as you can hear, these relationships with the
So
families.
you've given them connection where they've had connections broken, so.
Yeah. Yeah.
A bit between both, right? Like the terraza they have with the numerators and also the credit. It's a good mixture of two things, right? Like something more substantial and something more like hard or feeling.
Yeah.
So a bit when we receive your table, we have a bit more of a baseline, like that in which we record not only the district of where these people are, but also up to the location level and their address and their phone numbers. So then we divide this on a district level, and each team covers certain governorates. For example, Baghdad covers Baghdad, Anbar, and part of Salahuddin. Diyala is split north of Diyala because of access between Suli and Basra. So we calculate the number of interviews I have to do and also the distance. So this gets divided into the, let's say, bi-weekly operational plan. That's the places they have to cover. So then it's about asking access to these places, making sure that with the security colleagues that these places are not only accessible but also safe for
You've
the
had any
team.
issues with that?
We had some issues. For example, now there are a couple of areas in Salahuddin that we might not be able to cover physically. So this we will need to be doing it by phone, also in Anbar. Somehow we are still, because returnees, most of them, they return to safe areas. Sometimes it's more about access, but yeah, we have certain areas that they are not considered as safe enough to go and cover them. It's still very small percentage, but then we need to cover them by phone.
So we had also issues with some enumerators who could not,
yes,
for their other religion or ethnic group, some cannot access certain areas. So they were stopped at checkpoint and sent back because they didn't have letters. So
even within the same team, sometimes some field researchers they get access and some not, depending on their background. So we need to submit all, including the driver, all the papers, everything in advance to get the clearance to go and do the interviews. Also, even from the Mukhtar and local authorities, before they go, we have to call them and make sure that they know what we will be doing there, just to avoid any sort of issue on the ground. And then what they do is they call before they go and they kind of schedule the interview, and then we send them there. It's it's a bit of a.
So when they schedule, does everybody? Where do they do the interviews and how does that get scheduled?
It depends. Preferably in the house of the IDP or returnees because people tend to feel more comfortable. In some areas which are a bit more complicated, we gather them either in one of the IAM sub-office or the return centers that are operational, or if it's not possible, sometimes to a public space that we ask for, like mosque or yes, that's how we usually do it. It depends a bit on also a relationship between now they have a good network, the field researchers, so they know the areas, they know the places, but also it depends if the Mukhtar is willing to give, for example, a space or not, how many families they have to interview or not, but preferable option is the home of people.
Do you have other questions you want to? So, well, okay. Were there other, let's see, other, so we talked about a little bit that that's.
Just use the microphone. So
Yeah, no, I'm talking out loud, it's okay. I'm thinking out loud, so, you know. Other operational constraints that you would run into, kind of difficulties? So I guess, Olga and I were kind of talking about this outside. You know, as someone who designs research in an academy setting, you put things into these neat tables and you try to connect dots and you try to make it seem like you know what you're doing. And you do most of the time in theory, and then you get on the ground and it's like, now what? You know, what are the most, from someone who designs research to someone who carries out research, and in your experience, what are the things that you think that, you know, people really should be aware of when moving from the theoretical to the practical implementations? Like, what are the unexpecteds that we think are unexpected that you should in fact expect?
Yes. How questions are understood? They were saying it, right? Not everybody has the same education level. Not everybody understands questions in the same way. A lot of terms, when you translate them, they don't make sense, or they have another sense. So you need to always make sure that not only your team of field researchers, but also the respondents, they understand the questions in the same way, right? And in such big surveys or studies, first between the teams they might have different understanding of different things just because they are from different areas. And also we always try to send the field researchers to cover the areas that they know, that they are close, that they understand even the same dialect, everything. But of course people might understand them differently. So for me it's very important, and we always cover that during the training, right, to make sure that everybody understands to the extent possible the questions in the same way, and they transfer this information to the respondents so they also can understand it. Sometimes operationally there are things that are simply not possible. So, but we usually are very honest with that. We just say like, this question cannot be asked because you either put at risk the numerator or the respondents, or it creates a maybe situation in which nobody will be feel that we need tension, or there will be not enough trust, and certain areas that we cannot cover, and sometimes it's this week you can go to an area and next week you cannot go. So it's a bit on the go, right? You cannot predict in advance all the time. So
I think
go ahead.
No, maybe one thing that that from the beginning and we put a lot of effort in is training the teams, but these are probably the most trained teams ever, and it pays off. So especially in an emergency context, people tend to just give a training as in, okay, here's the questionnaire, yes, a quick translation, back translation, maybe you test it among each other. But I mean, the first two trainings that we did, it was, the first training was like a week on the framework for durable solution, principle of research. We had the psychosocial first aid for people that find themselves in a situation where the respondent may have an emotional breakdown. So we really, and I remember colleagues were also a bit, not skeptical, but like, oh, do you really need to tell them all these things? You know, they're just, and then yes, you really need to tell them all these things, because even if out of 25, only half get it, it's you will have better questions and better answers and better understanding. So I think that these teams, also to answer your question, at the beginning were fully hired, funded and dedicated to the study the first year, I think, because it was the most labor-intensive part at the beginning. And then now they've become the research teams for the mission, and they've carried out, I don't know, Olga,
8 to 10 projects a year.
A huge
So
project.
they involved in like DTM as well and things like that?
No.
They're separate teams, yes.
DTM are separate teams. DTM are like more operational data, so it's less, but they've carried out
They
this,
do more
yes.
in-depth research studies. So they cover, for example, qualitative focus group interviews that maybe that DTM is, they don't have the expertise. So yes, they've been doing all the in-depth research for a mission even across the different departments. So yes, and actually their knowledge of the context of it really helps when we create the tools, we share with them for feedback. So it's not only, they don't go and collect data, they are part of the full process.
This is also why I think it's really important that every year there's a training. So I think this year, Olga, you said that 25% of the research team is new.
Yes.
Right, so there are new people who are just joining the study. We've got, most of them have been doing this for a while now. But for those new people who don't know as much about it, keeping that training up is really important. And then even for the people who are coming back, if they're doing 8 to 10 projects a year, it is completely unreasonable to expect that they like retain every detail of every one of those projects, even if we do this over and over. The instrument overall has maintained at its core the same questions. We do switch up things. We switch up how we ask things. We switch up the order of things. We try to get rid of things, but it changes. More importantly, I mean, having now done the training 2 years in a row, you get different feedback on the same question because the situation changes, right? So one year, one thing was completely unimportant, and then the next year it comes back, you have to put this on, you have to put this on. I look at the data and it's like, but it didn't matter in round 4. But I trust that, right, so it might not, right, there's a part of it that kind of has to be open to the fact that just because it didn't matter in round 4, it doesn't mean it won't matter in round 5. And they're the people on the ground, and you trust the people in the room. You trust the people who are actually going out to do this. And their feedback in that sense has been invaluable. There were a couple of places on the survey where very small translation differences made all the difference in the world. And Arabic in particular has this fun thing that, and like anyone who studies the language loves to study, which is the difference between Al-Ami, the colloquial, and modern standard. Anyone who does survey research knows that you have to read the question exactly as it appears. And last year, one person looked at me and said, like, go to the moon and come back. I'm not reading this question exactly as it appears. I'm going to sound stupid, and you're not going to get the answer that you want. And it's like, okay, I'm not going to argue with that because that, he or she is the person at the end of the day who's collecting the data. So, really being sensitive, and this is something that as this part of the world was not one previously where a lot of these types of studies had been done. So the body of knowledge that we have on methodology was not developed in the context of the Arab world, nor does anyone who really studies that part necessarily. It goes both ways. It's not that none of it's going to apply, but there are things that you're going to have to deal with. The language is one of them. So we changed the words. I mean, there are some questions on there now that I think aren't really modern standard Arabic. They'd be the way that like you text your family on WhatsApp, right? And that's fine, because if that's going to get me what I want, that's totally fine. But a lot of that was pushback from the enumerator saying, do you want me to follow your like pie in the sky like methodology theory, or do you want me to get the answer that is going to help you understand what's going on?
There are 2 other issues. When we went to train the first round, it was me and Lorenza and Grace, and I prepared everything in Arabic, and I'm like standing up there, and I get through about 5 minutes of it, and the group over there like raises their hand, and they go, can you do this in English too? Because we're from Suleymania, and we don't really speak Arabic, and you're speaking this funky dialect that we don't understand. And I was like, oh. So because of the diversity in Iraq of languages, ethnicities, religious, everything, writing one survey that can get to everybody. So there are people who give the survey in Kurdish. We do not control that. We cannot control that. We make the survey in English and Arabic, and then when they have to ask it in Kurdish, the Kurdish speakers translate it into Kurdish. Their Arabic right now is awesome. Like they went from, because in the Kurdistan area, the Kurdistan region of Iraq, they don't necessarily learn in Arabic. So they had really rudimentary Arabic. They had to use the English, but now they're quite good. The other thing I would say also in round 1 training, I am not an Iraq expert. I know more now than I did when we started this, that's for sure. But when we started this, I thought, what questions are we going to ask these people who've been displaced? And I felt, as I often feel, that it was just way too arrogant for me to come in with a list of questions. And so we took the enumerators, and Lorenza handed them over to me for 2 days, and I was like, okay, day 1, here's human subjects protection, here's how you protect for confidentiality. We did all of that sort of human subjects protection training, and I learned all sorts of words like sarbiyyat al-ma'lumat, which is confidentiality, if you need to know them. But then I said, you've been trained on what are durable solutions, you've been trained on the, all this sort of stuff. What questions should we ask them? And they were like, you're asking us. They're like, you're the doctora, they're like, you're the ones. I'm like, no, this is how, you have the knowledge, you know what has happened, And so we developed questions together, and then they had to go out and test their questions with actual live, IDPs that they had to interview, which was also just...
Bus convoys, that was a nice...
massive bus convoys. Well, it was just one bus, but with music and dancing.
Yes,
it was the most, yeah, anyway, it was great fun. We had a great time. But they really struggled on the ground asking some of these questions, and they were awkward, and we were all awkward, and everybody was very forgiving of all of us, and we came back in the room the next day and rewrote the questions together. I mean, and we, I would put them into groups, and we would rewrite them and work on them. So the first round questions, some of them we added in because we wanted to make sure that certain questions were asked, but I think more than half of them were the questions that the enumerators themselves created out of this process. So I think it was a really, they are very good at what they do. You know that much better than we do, but we did invest a lot of time in training them, and I think it's been really good for the Iraq IOM mission to have this group of people who have such deep knowledge of how to do research. And none of them are trained in statistics or social science.
No. Most of them, they have engineering background, actually.
Yeah.
That's when you post a position for a survey or you get the land, the oil engineers.
It's a translation issue, huh? We also learned, Olga, you said about, we keep calling them enumerators.
Yes.
But enumerators.
You corrected yourself earlier.
I did, because Olga tells us we can't call them enumerators anymore because we've learned that gets translated as addad, which is like a counter, and that's also in Iraq what they call the person who pumps the gas. So you've got these highly educated, highly trained people who are being called basically like gas pumpers. So we now try to call them field researchers. But it's another one of these translation things where, you wouldn't have, but yeah.
So you got the Shakomako stuff also?
Holy moly, no. That's an
Iraqi.
What's up?
So what's up?
Like salt. Yeah.
Question there.
So you mentioned earlier that these were randoms, you said it was random sampling, right? But then you also mentioned, I caught that you were saying that you made sure to get people, you sampled population from every one of the original 7 governors. How did you combine those two? Because when you do random sampling, you just, you hit just about, it's random, right? Then how do you go about making sure that they come from a certain area?
Sure, so it's not a simple random sample, it's a proportionate sample with 2 stratification variables with disproportionate allocation to the strata. And what that means is that, each... Okay, so a stratification variable is just a variable by which I can cut up people into groups, right? Male, female, different races, different religions, different whatever, like colors of hair. So we had 2 of those, and that was governorate of origin and governorate of displacement. When you put those together, you get a grid that has 28 theoretical cells, because we have 7 origin and 4 displacement. One of those cells is naturally empty. We just did not, that combination didn't exist. So we have, each one of those cells is now called a strata. So we had theoretically 28, technically 27 strata. So from each one of those cells, we can look at the DTM and say, okay, 80% of people who were displaced from Baghdad ended up in Anbar. I know who they are. I'm going to go enroll them in the study. There are 2 ways to do, the second part of this is the disproportional allocation to the strata. So one way to do it is, 80% of all this is made up. 80% of all IDPs are from Baghdad or in Anbar. I'm going to sample 80. Well, mathematically, you can't end up doing that because there are some cells that have so few real numbers that if I just sample proportionally, like if it's 25% of the population is going to be 25% of my sample, the probability of them getting into the sample is near 0, or existently 0. So we fudge that a little bit with math, and we come up with a different formula that basically ensures that people who are really, really underrepresented in the population definitely end up in the sample. So it is a simple random, it's not a simple random sample, it's a proportionally stratified random sample.
Thank you.
And then in each cell, where we end up with a sample size for each cell or each of these 27 strata. Let's say that we have 100 people that we need 100 people that are in Basra from Kirkuk.
Yeah.
And then we go there in Basra and we ask, we know where they are to the DDM, so we know the location and we know the characteristics, so that we physically on the ground go and identify them, and then we tick done, and when then we exclude.
Yeah, so they're random and they're kind of the idea of where they're from. Yeah, within a bucket, and then you and this this is as random as it gets, right? Especially in a context like Iraq, the fact that we can get it this random is like we deserve like gold medals. She deserves gold medals. They deserve gold medals. I just explain this stuff.
You just made the pretty
I make the pretty tables. It's trying to get a truly random sample, and if anyone has taken any classes on statistics or remembers anything, if you don't have a random sample, your results are not going to generalize to the people that you think it does. You're going to have some sort of bias, right? And this is kind of, I think, truly random as you can get in a place like Iraq, because it's not the United States where there's the yellow pages and you have everybody's phone numbers and you can random digit dial, right? That structure doesn't exist. There's a increasing push to try and figure out how we can build random samples throughout the Arab world that can actually do this. One new one that's being used is like water bills or electricity bills. That can't be used everywhere, but we're coming towards this. The DTM as a sample frame, as a list of potential elements from which we can choose, is leaps and bounds forward from what we previously were able to do, because you're not going to go, like this idea of a simple random sample of just like going to the street and knocking on every other house, unless you have millions and millions and billions of dollars worth of money to actually do that, that's not the way that, operationally, that's a constraint.
We did it in Haiti and the Philippines. That was a simple random sample.
Haiti and the Philippines, you did?
In the Philippines, because we selected areas that were affected by. So we selected area according to 3 variables. Mm-hmm. One was the 5 kilometers in the
radius.
The radius of the storm.
Of the storm, exactly, and then the poverty. There's 4 level of poverty index from the census, and then we had the third one that was urban rural, and so then you had we picked 1 strata per combination of these characteristics, and then we literally walked, but that was what I was saying before. Then we sample and we can end up with somebody that was displaced, with a house where somebody was displaced or not displaced. Mm-hmm. Right. So that you have to, but now to do that in Iraq, it would have been a bit impossible. It's such a...
Maybe in camps you could do something
camps,
similar, but not in other...
Exactly.
This is why we have so much data from camps, even though they're the minority of people, is that I can walk into a camp and I've got a grid.
Yeah, exactly.
And I can say, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Mm-hmm. In cities, it's right. It's a lot harder, and you have to rely. This is also where local knowledge becomes really, really important. At the end of the day, we know that certain types of communities tend to live close to each other, right? So if I know there's a certain neighborhood where there are a lot of people from X group, I can then go in there and try to figure out how to randomly do it in the absence of pretty lists with phone numbers and addresses.
Yes.
First, I want to say congratulations to all of you. This is an amazing product and work, and you do deserve gold medals. So, I wanted to know if the questionnaire is online. I'm interested in knowing more about the questionnaire. One of your field researchers mentioned that the questions should be acceptable to the community. I didn't understand what he meant by acceptable. Was it socially sensitive or understandable? And also, did you have follow-up questions for the region? So you had your standard questions, and then, or did you just let people talk, or did you actually have follow-up questions depending on the region they came from and what they experienced?
So the questionnaire is not up yet. That is something we actually, that's an idea for the future, hopefully, not just the questionnaire, maybe even the data, making it available in some way so that other people can look at this incredible study. That's first. Second, on the questionnaire itself, we did not put region specific. We put subgroup specific, so IDPs, returnees, movers. So we had, population specific. But what we relied on is, we can analyze if there are geographic differences in the analysis phase. We didn't really go into it with the assumption that the durable solutions, if we go back to the questions that we asked, that there would necessarily be a challenge specific to Slemaniye with respect to accessing the durable solutions that would need more there that wasn't in Kirkuk. That is entirely a possibility. We just didn't approach it or look at it this way. We just relied on being able to, post hoc look at be able to look at these questions in different ways. And this is where kind of the integration between qual and quant came in, where if we saw something, we would go to the qual and be like, this doesn't really make sense. Can we, can we shed light on it by asking more? Because at the end of the day, all surveys impose answers on respondents, right? And even, they'll select something there, but a survey can't get at a process. And if we kind of go with our very finding that a solution is a process, a survey will give us kind of the main kind of data points, but connecting the dots is something that the qualitative really, really excels at, like telling us the process of it. In terms of sensitive questions, and I think Olga and Lorenza and Rochelle can speak to this, I remember from the trainings that so it had both had to do with wording and with topics. So for example, this round, last round we introduced the question on how much do you spend a month in each, on your expenses. And the enumerators, or the field researchers last year and this year, once again said, this is not a comfortable question to ask, and I don't think they're comfortable answering it. From my end, I look at the data and I got answers. And then I've got other data that I can compare this stuff to, like for the food, that was about on par with what other studies have found. So yes, it might not be comfortable, but the extent to which the data is accurate is actually not compromised, even if it's not entirely comfortable. There are other things where we completely pulled back. Here's a very sensitive one that we no longer ask. We asked about who is in control of the area, where your area of origin specifically, right? And in some places, this was a controversial question. And so what the field research said last year was that the respondent will tell me something and I'm looking outside or and it's clear that that's not the party that's in charge. And that is and that was partly because it could be lack of knowledge, but more often than not, it was, it turned into a political question where that wasn't really the point of it. So the way around that was that we had two questions. We had a respondent provided answer and a field researcher provided answer. Most of the time they ended up being the same, right? But there are some, so we took into consideration that the field researchers were saying, if you want good data on this, this isn't how you're gonna, get to it.
I think the closest we get to add maybe some control. We added some context variable, yes, but more on different groups. Asking about different groups, like what about the resident population, what about other IDPs, what about people who have returned. So this is not location specific as in one government versus another, but it's more like to have a comparison or a meter of comparison. And this is a bit what I was saying this morning. The framework talks about discrimination with respect to those that were not displaced and talks a bit about your situation before. And so we try to feature in always a question on their situation pre-displacement to have like one point of reference now the past, and then again asking question about other groups, so to see how this group fares in comparison to other IDPs, returnees, or people who were not displaced. I think as far as we went.
And in the qualitative, we always end with the last question being, is there anything you'd like to tell us? And then, well, the question before that has usually been, what do you think others should be doing to sort of assist your situation? Then usually it's, is there anything else you'd like to tell us? Because we want to sort of, we've kind of structured them to answer these questions, but there may be things they want to tell us. And sometimes those are really long answers, and sometimes they're like, no, I think I've told you everything. We also had a section, we also asked the enumerators, the field researchers, to write down their observations as well of who was in the room or the feelings that the person was expressing, because even when they were, typing out they wrote them by hand and then came home and typed them for us. They weren't, we wouldn't know who was in the room, or we wouldn't know if somebody got really upset, or if, what exactly happened. So they would oftentimes give us really good information to help to frame what we were reading.
You visited the houses, or the people visited the headquarters?
Everything. Everything. They visited wherever they could get the people. That was what Olga was talking about.
Usually the house. If possible, the house. That's first option. If it's not possible, then a public space.
And it was mostly done throughout, right, on tablets, and then
yes.
uploaded.
The quantitative part is done on tablets. They do it using Codike. The qualitative part they do it by hand.
Any other questions?
I just want to comment, I hope you do post the questions because they're really helpful to other people that would follow up on your work. Or I know I've used people's questions from prior to replicate what they've done later. So they would be very valuable.
I can easily put the qual questions up. The quant are a bit of a technological difficulty. But the qual I can easily
We would learn from them a lot because of all the work that you went through to make them.
Sure, yeah, happy to.
And there is also, there is this, yes, exactly, the JIPS, I don't know if you're familiar with the JIPS work, is the Joint IDP Profiling Service. It's a Geneva-based, are they NRC? DRC? NRC? Anyway, it's and they have led, and they continue leading, a project which is supported by different UN agencies, including IOM, through the different case studies, on building an indicators library, so durable solution indicator library. And IOM actually contributed with this study, the Philippines and Haiti, and another one in Ukraine. And other agencies or NGOs contributed with their own studies. And they've come up with a library that is online that has endless number of indicators, but this is like the result of 2 years of discussion, so which question work and which question don't work, and of course they're very much context based in some context, so it's a really long list, but it's a very useful tool, and now they want to build like a community of practice to keep discussing about this, and this was in the last year, the GP20, the guiding principle, the 20th anniversary of the guiding principle. There was a plan of action done last year, and one of the recommendations is again to continue this community of practice for indicators. So that's something else you find online.
Well, thank you all very much, and yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to us.